that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Science fiction often uses the mechanism known as time travel to ask the question, what if Abraham Lincoln could be saved? In this video, we take a look at those stories from television and even a comic book story that explains why Superman couldn't even save Lincoln from being shot via time travel. But first, let's take a quick look at the original history of Abraham Lincoln and his assassination. Lincoln served as president between March 4, 1861 through April 15, 1865. Lincoln is probably one of the most popular presidents ever, having guided America through a deadly civil war and bringing freedom to the slaves through the Emancipation Proclamation. History buffs will always wonder what may have changed if Lincoln's term had not been cut short, such as a more friendly and patient bringing of the South back into the Union, for example. Lincoln didn't believe in punishing his enemies once they were defeated. He believed the only way to truly eliminate enemies is to make them your friends. After major Union victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg in 1863, Lincoln had began to make plans for Reconstruction to reunify the North and the South after the war was over. He based his plan on a simple premise of forgiveness. He announced his intent with what was called the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction in 1863. Lincoln's plan was designed to make it easy for Confederates to accept and was very reasonable considering how much the war had cost. Historians speculate that Lincoln wanted a swift change back to the way things were as far as the unification of the states was concerned. But Lincoln's assassination in 1865 forever altered history, as Lincoln's replacement Andrew Johnson's policies were not very kind to the South. If stepping on a butterfly in science fiction could change the future, imagine what would have happened if Abraham Lincoln had not been shot. As we know it to be in the original timeline of Lincoln's assassination on the evening of April 14, 1865. At 10:15, Lincoln was watching a comedy called Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater when John Wilkes Booth slipped into the box where Lincoln was sitting. Booth then fired his .44 caliber single-shot Derringer pistol into the back of Lincoln's head. He then stabbed Henry Rathbone, a military officer who was sitting next to the president. Booth leapt down and shouted the Virginia state motto. The crowd at first believed it was just part of the drama. Booth broke his leg but still managed to escape the theater and get away from Washington on horseback. Lincoln was carried to a boarding house across the street where he died at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, at the age of 56. Many science fiction stories have placed a time traveler in the same period as the 16th president, giving the hero a chance to possibly alter history by saving Lincoln.
Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Some, such as the episode of the Twilight Zone back there, placed the time traveler in the time and place just before Lincoln's assassination, giving the traveler the best opportunity to save Lincoln in rewriting history. The traveler in this story was Peter Corrigan, played by Russell Johnson. You know him as the professor from Gilligan's Island. Coincidentally, he played on 2 Twilight Zone episodes, and both were about time travel. Now, wouldn't it be neat to find out that Gilligan's Island was in fact a time travel story as well? Maybe the crew actually went through a time storm. Okay, well, if that were true, they would have never been rescued in the 2-hour reunion movie of the 70s, but, you know. Now, in the episode in question, Corrigan is involved in a discussion with colleagues at an elite club on the question of whether events in history could be changed if time travel were possible. On the way out of the club, Corrigan becomes faint, and suddenly he's transported to April 14, 1865, the date of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He's even given clothes of the day somehow. Now, since it's the Twilight Zone, they never gave any explanation as to how he got into the past, how did he get the clothes from the past, etc. And like I said, this was the case with many Twilight Zone episodes, probably all of them. Things would just happen because it is the Twilight Zone, and that's all you needed to know. Now, this really helped to speed the stories along, of course, which had to fit in the 30-minute time frame, minus the commercials. Now, on a side note, I have to say the Twilight Zone actually seemed a little less interesting when they extended episodes to an hour for the fourth season. Often I think hour-long shows tend to fill up time with unnecessary filler, whereas the old 30-minute action or drama shows got right to the point at a much quicker pace. Now, Corrigan runs into John Wilkes Booth in the episode and gets drugged and is unable to save the president. He does, however, manage to make a small change in history. When he returns to the 60s, he finds that the butler he ran into at the club now is rich because of interaction Corrigan had with his great-grandfather, a policeman who became famous and later rich for having tried to warn everyone the president was in danger. A lot of other shows have had Honest Abe appear, but I don't think any has ever saved the president from his ultimate fate, including the Time Tunnel. Now, this show featured two time-lost travelers that are part of a huge government project. They bounce around in time while those at the home base try to bring them back. Sounds a little like Quantum Leap, but you have to remember this series came out years before, way back in 1966. Now, in the Time Tunnel episode, The Death Trap, the two main characters, scientists named Doug and Tony, land 4 years before Lincoln's assassination, just in time to get involved with an anti-slavery group that wants to kill Lincoln because he's not moving fast enough to end slavery, which is nuts, of course, considering it's Lincoln that ends slavery. Now, in the episode, the crew and the president responsible for trying to bring Doug and Tony back actually view the assassination of Lincoln through the tunnel, even though usually they can only view the time period which Doug and Tony are at that moment. Now, by the end of the episode, Doug and Tony are able to stop the early assassination attempt, which involved a primitive time bomb. In one scene I found particularly interesting, Abraham Lincoln talks to Doug, seeing him as a man with the ability to foretell the future, and asks him what he sees going forward. And when Doug tries to warn Lincoln about his future, Lincoln cuts him off and says, "Not about me, the nation. Will the Union be standing a decade from now?" He replies, "Yes, even a century after. This nation will still be thriving." Lincoln, of course, is happy to hear that America will still be around for another 100 years. The time travelers, of course, find the bomb and save the president, but of course are unable to alter his future assassination in 1865. Now, the early 80s TV series Voyagers featured two time travelers who have to fix history along the way. One is a swashbuckling hero named Phineas, who lost his history manual, and the other is a kid he picked up along the way, who just happens to know all there is to know about history, which would probably be unheard of today, of course. I mean, a kid knowing history? It is a shame, of course. Now, everybody should learn about history, but for some reason it seems to be pushed aside as not very important these days. I highly recommend The Voyagers. It's a great family-friendly, fun show to watch, and it has a bit of education related to history, of course. Now, in this particular episode I want to talk to you about, the time travelers, Phineas and Jeffrey, prevent Abe from getting kidnapped. This episode features John Anderson as Lincoln. Interestingly enough, he played Lincoln a couple of other times in different productions, like Lincoln Trial by Fire, which I saw on YouTube the other day for free. Now, in the episode The Day the Rebs Took Lincoln, Phineas and Jeffrey find the South is winning the Civil War, and they have to save Lincoln from being kidnapped. Now, in this episode, there's a cool John Wayne-style stunt scene where they save Lincoln from a runaway stagecoach after they foiled the kidnapping plot. Now, in the 2016 NBC series Timeless, there's an episode also called The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, that was a decent show, but every now and again they had these woke moments here and there that sort of countered the otherwise interesting show. Now, there's also a cool story I actually just discovered the other day from way back in 1960 that details why Superman, as Superboy, could not stop Abraham Lincoln from being shot. The story was presented in a comic book number 85 of Superboy. It actually came out before the Twilight Zone episode back there had even aired. Now, you could have got this story for only one thin dime back then. It's the last story in the book, called The Impossible Mission, and takes place in Superman's career when he was still Superboy. It starts out with a Abraham Lincoln Day celebration in Smallville, where Clark is being moved by the mayor's speech on the Civil War and Abe's assassination. During this, he gets an incredible idea. What if he could go back in time and save Lincoln from being shot? Now, back then, it was no big deal for Superboy or Superman to fly fast enough to go backward into time. Superboy materializes on Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, after flying back into the past. Scanning with his X-ray vision, he spots a note with a message to not disturb a Mr. L in room 309 of a local hotel. Thinking it refers to Lincoln, Superboy flies through a window of the hotel to the room, only to find out it's a time-traveling adult version of Lex Luthor. Luthor brings red kryptonite and springs it on Superboy, which always affects Superman in different ways. This time, it froze Superboy like a statue, making him unable to move. Now, Superboy is helpless to move as he watches a nearby clock tick away to the time of Lincoln's assassination. Just across the street, John Wilkes Booth carries out his terrible deed. Luthor hears the commotion across the street and realizes that Superboy had came there to save Lincoln, not capture him. As evil as he is, the thought of being the one responsible for thwarting the possibility of saving one of America's greatest presidents troubles him to no end as he gets into his time machine and heads back to the 20th century, realizing sorrowfully that the blood of Lincoln is on his hands. As the effects of the red kryptonite wear off, Superboy flies back to the present day, 1960, where he later takes a trip to Washington, D.C. to visit the Lincoln Memorial, still keeping the secret of his failed attempt to save the president from his parents. Of course, generally speaking, the idea that only minor events can be altered is a staple of time travel stories, probably if for no other reason than to keep the story somewhat grounded in our own reality. If one really could travel back and save Lincoln, how would it stick? Because, as we know in time travel, there are paradoxes. If Lincoln never gets shot, then you would never have a reason to go back to save him in the first place. So you don't go back, and then he gets shot anyway. Especially if the whole reason you invented your time machine was to go back to save Lincoln. Speaking of time travel, if you love the subject as much as I do, let me recommend my book series, The Time Cruisers. In the first book, a group of teenagers from the 50s, a professor, and a government agent from World War II end up fighting time-traveling Nazis, an adventure that takes them across several time periods, including the epic beginnings of the Great Flood from the Bible and the Exodus from Egypt with the children of Israel and Moses. And if you love Western action with a sci-fi twist, then you'll love the second book, The Man from Nowhere.
God bless you all.